and that kind of segues a little bit into the Linux module we do. We were actually joking this morning is we don't even use the term
Brian's
Unix anymore.
Yeah, Brian's so old that he used to call it Unix. I don't even think I never called it Unix.
Back in the day, it was like Solaris, HPUX. It was flavors. Now Linux is really taking over. There's still multiple flavors of Linux.
Yeah, there's other kernels and systems that people use, but Linux has definitely taken over. Ubuntu, Debian, Red Hat, Fedora, CentOS.
And the segue to me is everything in Linux can be done on the command line. And so when you want to start automating things, it's very easy to use Linux as a tool to automate things and cron things away. That said, I will shamefully admit that I'm really excited to see Windows with the new PowerShell. They've kind of
I was about to say, this module probably needs a little bit of revision.
Yeah, they've gone a little further to help.
They've made things a lot more
scripting.
accessible and scriptable.
Yep.
The other thing that I was just sort of thinking about here is I was looking over the notes for this section, is one of the key things about Linux is it's always been a command line first system, no matter what OS you're using. Nowadays, it's definitely gotten where you can get things like, I think it's like Snap OS, and there's a couple other flavors that are really meant to be more user accessible, but still you can get into the terminal and everything's well documented for Linux. There is
the man pages.
You have the man pages to start with. I mean, that's the first place. But just on the internet, there's a lot of documentation of how to do things on the command line. For many years, doing anything on the Windows command line was extremely challenging, and you had to definitely be an expert to understand it or dive through really dense documentation. Microsoft has now pivoted as an organization to that cloud's the big motivator, and for the cloud, you don't need a user interface, and so command line has become really important to interacting with Windows systems. So I still stand by, though, that what Brian's about to talk about here with Linux is definitely the best course of action for, I'll say, the majority of people to go and learn because of its accessibility to new users and new rising professionals that are trying to learn the fundamentals of working on the command line and feeling comfortable in it. It's always been that way, so there is just more accessibility there.
And I haven't, I've played a little bit with PowerShell. I wrote a script the other day to do something, just some text parsing. A lot of times in the past, we don't always control the desktop at our work environment. A lot of times your work will supply you with a computer. It may have Windows, it may have Linux, and you won't have choice. And furthermore, you won't even have admin rights. So, a lot of times I would install Cygwin, which was a Linux emulator, which allowed me to do a lot of my automation on Windows and, basically use all my Linux scripts on Windows. I would say experiment with Windows PowerShell now and see if you can, leverage some of that scripting capability before installing the emulator. If it falls short, just install the emulator. Maybe, nowadays too, maybe you could use a VM on Windows to do some of the automation.
I actually use, I don't use Cygwin anymore. I use Git Bash.
Okay.
So I'll add a link for that in here. But that one's really nice because it gives you Vim and ls and cd, like all your familiar Linux commands, plus Git, which is typically, there's find and set.
Find is like my go-to Linux command, I gotta admit. Usually I'm doing some sort of global find and replace, so I'm parsing it to either some sort of regex, sed, Perl, or a global grep of some command in my scripts. So we often encourage people to learn Fedora Linux. And when we talk about flavors, it really has nothing to do with what we like, unfortunately. We're not trying to endorse anything. We don't get paid here to endorse things. Even if we did get paid, we would not endorse things. Ultimately, we're here to endorse what helps you in your career the most. And so we kind of push you guys in the direction of Fedora because that is the workspace desktop version of Red Hat. And what you'll see is CentOS is the free server version. Not asking you to go install that on your laptop. A lot of times the drivers don't always work great for the network. or the mouse or some other components. So Fedora kind of gets you the best of breed, and then you're learning the subtleties to the commands that Red Hat and CentOS, which are going to be the servers that most of the industry is using. So if you're getting a job, you'll have that subtle experience. So if you see Red Hat or CentOS, you can say, yeah, I use Fedora, which is a Red Hat flavor or a CentOS flavor. And sometimes on your resume, you want to put, Fedora, Red Hat, CentOS, because recruiters, God bless them, they're given a list of terms, and if their term is CentOS and you say Red Hat, they might.
It does not equal.
Yeah,
so
it doesn't equal. Like, yep, we can't use this guy. You'd be amazed. Go ahead.
I was gonna say is you might not be aware of this, but with CentOS specifically, it looks like there's some shifting changes in the industry with that. So maybe in the next couple years, we'll be adapting this to whatever industry starts to accept and use more. But still to this day, Red Hat is very dominant in the enterprise, either CentOS or Red Hat proper. People are definitely making a shift towards Ubuntu and Debian and things like that, but really more Ubuntu. So there's some shifting landscapes there. We still stand by, though, that Red Hat's a great place to start and begin learning, because it's still going to be supported for many years. And so in enterprise, people are slow to move. You want stability and they want consistency. It's important that you don't do an upgrade and everything just breaks. So I don't see that changing anytime in the next 2-3 years, really, for our recommendation to learn Red Hat. But that's not to say that if you're doing Ubuntu in school and you're really familiar with Ubuntu, it should be easy enough to transition to using Fedora and getting familiar with the nuances between the two, just to prepare yourself and, like Brian said, be able to put down on your resume the key terms that are aligned with what the job you're applying to are.
And the other thing, the subtlety is, we encourage you to load dual boot or load Linux as your day-to-day operating system. It's kind of gets back to that belief of, hands-on experience you learn from. If you just have a VM, or, the famous thing that people always used to tell us is, well, I installed Linux on the computer in my basement. Well, how often are you going to use that computer? Really never. Let's admit the truth to ourselves. A lot of times we lie to ourselves, not other people. And so the more you're using it day to day, kind of that whole swim mentality, you got to get in the pool to swim. So I know when I started using Linux every day, it forced me to ask the question, well, how do I do this? How do I do that? And actually, interestingly enough, it pushed me to the cloud earlier. So I really became an earlier adopter of a lot of the cloud technologies, a lot of the online G Suite stuff we used early, because of not wanting to, for both compatibility and then having stuff up in the cloud and being able to switch computers often. I did that. The other thing to note is a lot of times when we're doing stuff on a flavor of Linux, we're doing it remotely on other servers. So we're using the command line constantly. And so be very comfortable with the command line, because, oftentimes servers in server rooms, you're just SSHing into them. You're, who knows where that server is these days? They're somewhere in cold Minnesota or Alaska, and I don't think you want to go there. I could make my new cold Texas joke.
Even with the cloud, you just can't go there. You have to use the command line. You can't. Yeah. You can start a Linux VM with some sort of GUI. You have to install it yourself on AWS, but it's not easy. It's designed to be connected with SSH or any of the other hosting providers: DigitalOcean, OVH, Azure. Google.
So get used to the command line is the key. Yeah. And that leans right back to the whole automation thing. If you're comfortable with the command line, anything you can write on the command line, you can automate, right? So that's key. I know in Linux, every little nitnoid command, that's on the user interface, you can do on the command line somehow. I'm not advocating go learn how to change your background
even
using
on Windows. There is now starting to be some functions that they don't even have support for in any of their GUIs, because they just want you to go and do it on the command line, because it's meant to be run on servers, dealing with things like NuGet. And in order to publish a package to the .NET equivalent of Maven, you have to go and use the command line to do it. There isn't a way in Visual Studio or anything like that to do it. So getting familiar and comfortable with the command line and how to find out the information you need on a given operating system is really important, really critical.
So the other subtlety that I'll get into that I forgot to mention is we talked a little about the work environment not having root access. Uh, on your daily computer, you should go check right now. I don't know if you're probably sitting in front of it. If it's Windows, please make sure that you're not the administrator by default.
Mm-hmm.
Go change yourself right now to a restricted user. Why is this important? Well, the biggest lesson I learned is don't ever tell your neighbors and friends and family that you know anything about computers, or you'll be fixing every one of their printers, right? B, then they're calling you constantly with computer problems. And what I found was as soon as I removed their restricted or place their everyday user as a restricted user, most of the problem stopped. Because if you're logged in as root right now, on your computer, if you click on a harmful email, that email now executes as root. Whereas if you're a restricted user, if you're a restricted user, it's going to try to execute and it's going to say permission denied. So even on my daily computer, I have myself as a restricted user under Windows. And then under Linux, do not log in as root. Take your admin privileges and assign it to another user. Please write down the password. I can't tell you the number of people that come in Monday nights to the incubator and tell us they don't know the root password on their computer.
Yeah.
I commend that they're not running as root, but where we're going with this is you have to get used to operating in an environment where you don't have root on your daily computer, because in the work environment, you won't have that. So if you get spoiled at home, when you go to work, you're going to be like, I can't do anything. I don't know how to do anything. Julio, And then the admin's going to be like, who's this chump new guy? He can't do anything. Right. And so learn how to operate in an environment where you're not admin, and understand what you need administrative rights for and what you don't, so that you understand when you need to ask for things.
Yeah, this is another thing that nowadays has gotten a lot better, in that when setting up any Linux OS, they typically force you to set up a non-root user in addition to setting a root password. So root is your administrative user, the top most privileged user in Linux. On any operating system in Linux. On Windows, on the admin side, I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure they do have, they've started to move this direction a little bit more, and they started to put more controls around so that you have to be in an administrative session, but still setting up two separate users, an administrator user, a root user, and your local everyday user is definitely critical to just making sure that you don't completely bork your machine.
Nah, my dad, we got that HP. Remember we bought that for my dad? I unboxed that bad boy. I started it right up, and he was admin by default. I was like, no, Dad, not going to happen.
You're not getting an IT support call.
I changed that admin password. I don't even tell it to him. He's his own worst enemy these days. I say, Dad, call me if you need something. And I put him as a restricted user. And I will tell you that has cut 99% down on my problems, right? And my dad, God bless him, he's a stubborn old man. Right. And so when the first problem happens, he tries to fix it. And does anybody know what happens when you try to fix a problem? Right. It makes it worse. And then eventually my mom calls me, your dad can't use the computer anymore. It broke like 3 days ago. He was trying to fix it. Now it won't even boot. Right. That's usually the call I get. Right. And at that point, it's like, now I'm reinstalling the operating system from some simple like permission problem that he's managed to just totally screw everything up. God bless him. Love him to death. But, sometimes you have to protect people from themselves. So setting up that restricted user has been the godsend to helping fix all those problems.
And if you did happen to make the mistake of letting someone know that you know how to fix a computer, all you have to do is just take their administrative privileges away and just not give them their administrative account back.
Yeah, I changed all of my neighbors to restricted user and don't give them the password unless they call and ask, And then
they yell at you and fire you and
barter for that. Yeah. Or the other thing is I like to do this is when I'm fixing somebody's computer. Oh, how'd you learn all this about computers? I'll be, I don't know anything about computers, but I'm just not afraid to break yours. And then their face usually lights up like, oh my God, he's going to break my computer. All right. So back to Linux. One of the other topics we have is security. So there's stuff about defense in depth here, and there's a lot of rumors that Linux is more secure than Windows or Mac or anything. As much as I want to say those are true, I don't necessarily believe that they're true. What it comes down to is ultimately, Windows still has a majority of the computers, so people are going to target where the majority is. So they're going to go after the majority. So Linux is inherently more safe because it's just less of a target, not
Well,
that it's a
it's less of a target for end users.
correct.
It's more of a target for servers. I mean,
Yes.
Linux is definitely the most run operating system on a server side. So if you're running a server and it's not secure, it's going to be a much larger target than a Windows server still is going to be a target just because of the massive people that use it, as well as the massive companies that use it for applications.
Yeah, and the biggest problem that we see from an industry standpoint and why servers aren't secure is people do not just do the simple, yum updates. Keep the simple packages installed that would solve the problems. And we see
You can
that.
automate most of that these days.
Yeah, it should be all automated. And so, there's, we talk about SE Linux. A lot of times I feel a disservice if I don't mention it because it's a package that sits on top that helps secure things. And oftentimes it makes it so secure that we can't do some of our development tasks. So there's some extra work that goes into opening ports or, putting the right flags
Changing
on
configs and things.
Yeah.
If you see a tutorial online that says disable SE Linux as the way to solve all the problems, just close that tab and find a different solution because that is not the answer. SE Linux provides a lot of security out of the box for you, and disabling it just sort of cuts you off at the knees.
So that's, I don't have any more on security. I don't like to really dive
I'll talk
too
a little
far.
bit more about into it when we do the intro to security.
Okay.
But I think, the key thing is definitely nowadays, security is something that's at the forefront. Every operating system has their own weaknesses and their own benefits. I could go on and on about how Linux is doing their security, how Windows does theirs, and how Mac does theirs. And they all do different things, and they provide security for their users. And at the end of the day, they don't want to be the center of whatever the next big compromise is. And so they're all working hard towards it. It really more comes down to the simple things. What operating system you pick is not going to save you from getting your password stolen or phished via an email or just a known vulnerability compromise. That could happen on any operating system. It comes down to more of your practices and processes. So we'll talk about that stuff more in a later module.
So, one of the takeaways from today that I hope you guys do is go dual boot your laptop, desktop, try to learn, get in the pool, so to speak. I love to use swimming as an analogy because a lot of things in life are very similar to swimming. You can't learn how to swim standing outside the pool and looking in on the pool. And when you first get in the pool, if you ease yourself in, you're really struggling with every little inch of cold water. Sometimes jumping in, if anybody ever, I'm a big believer, just jump in and get it all over with. Even getting my head wet at the
Well,
first
this is funny.
jump.
It goes back to kind of a little bit of what you're talking about with atomic habits and just getting yourself showing up at the gym. Same thing here with running Linux. Step one is just install it.
Boot.
Yeah, get it on there, boot into it, just start using it. But nowadays, you do most things in the browser anyways. If you're doing school online, if you're using Google Classroom and Blackboard or Canvas or whatever, or WebEx, most of these things just work in the browser. You don't need the desktop versions of things right now.
Yeah.
Then you'll be like, well, Brian did mention that thing that one Saturday about getting onto the command line, and I just need to go and find this file somewhere. I don't know where it is. Maybe I'll go learn the find command. I'm here. I might as well. And slowly and surely you'll start using the command line for everything. If you're using a Mac, same deal there. We still encourage. Nowadays, it's really hard to dual boot a Mac, so I'm not going to encourage that right now. We used to help people with that when we did the in-person incubator, but nowadays that we're remote, I wouldn't recommend it. But the command line on the Mac is just as powerful as on
It's
Linux.
FreeBSD based.
Yeah, it's a
Variant.
Unix operating system or Unix based. It's now morphed and evolved, but you can get on the command line. You can, I'll say 90% parity with Linux in the commands and their syntaxes. There's always a little bit of minor differences, but if you're on Mac, open up the command line. Do your work for your comp sci class on the command line. Use Git on the command line. Just search for files or copy files on the command line.
Should we put over the wire?
Oh yeah, we definitely should put that in here. I'll post.
So what we ask people to do is before they come to the incubators to complete the first 10 levels of Bandit, which is over the wire, to just gain some familiarity. I actually, my son, I bought him a Mac, and I told him that I'd get him a Mac if he did Bandit, though. That was the deal.
Do you have to do all the levels?
I think he did up to level, I think 15.
Okay.
And so he did it, and then I told him I didn't believe him. He got all mad at me. I said, I want you to show me to do it. So I made him show me, do it in front of me. And I knew he did them, but it was really neat to see him going back through that. And for context, at the time he did it, he was 12. He's 14 now, so...
It's definitely accessible. There's plenty of materials online to give it a whirl. I posted a link in the chat. We actually require people to complete the first 10 levels before we have them start the incubator, just because it gives everyone a good starting point to understanding the core concepts.
Yeah, so again, I mean, I would encourage you guys to dual boot. Don't wipe out your current operating system. I don't want anybody coming to me and saying they flunked school because they did what I said and they couldn't do their homework and go to class for 3 weeks because their computer was down. Just dual boot. It's getting easier, and, if you've got, homework due or some big exam the next day, that's not the night to learn Linux, okay? I applaud that you're trying to learn Linux, but you know what? Go back to your comfort zone for that, instance. Pass your test, stay focused on that, and then switch back over when you have a little bit more time. As much as I want you guys to learn and grow, I want you to do it in a successful, productive manner. I want you to stay focused on priorities, which is generally learning in school, and then these kind of things go on top of that.
Yeah, it's the few hours a week. Yeah, it's not the
atomic habit concept, right? Maybe I'll add that book to our Rising Leaders Challenge series.
I haven't actually read that one, so I might take a listen to it.
Yeah. So if there's questions about Linux, feel free to post them in the chat. I think that gets to all the content. In the notes, you'll see we have some comments on how to install dual boot, but I think it's getting easier and easier these days with more resources on the internet. And I think at the incubator, they're using VMs these days when we want remote.
We do. I was going to say that's the dirty little secret, I guess, is we used to require people to dual boot. But given that we're remote, debugging a dual boot is really hard. And again, we don't want to...
Especially network problems.
Exactly. That's typically the problem we run into is dual boots. Is something with the Wi-Fi driver. Or a driver, and we've solved everybody's problems. I mean, there's always a solution. It's just a matter of it's not the most user-friendly initially. So right now, during COVID, and while people are really remote for a lot of things, I'll put the asterisks on this point and say that using a VM probably is going to be the safest way to start until you feel more comfortable with it, or if you have a second device or something like that. Having a VM is going to be the easiest way to make sure. So, Adam, I see your question there. Would a VM also be a good option to learn, or would you really recommend dual booting? We really recommend dual booting in a normal situation. Again, it's the jumping into the swimming pool. You're not going to be forced to learn it unless you're in the swimming pool.
I'll caveat this, right? If you're diligent enough to get on your computer and load the VM and use that VM, the majority of the time, let's just say 60%. Let's be cautious here, right? Then a VM is going to be successful. The problem is if the VM becomes an icon on your desktop that just clutters your desktop with everything else that you don't use, that's where we say it's a failure. So, I try to be a little more cautious these days and prescriptive and more about why we're worried about these things. I worry about people learning. I talk to all the time, right, about certificates. People always ask me that. I'm a little bit opposed to certificates. And it's not that I think certificates are bad, is that I think hands-on experience is the key to learning. And here's my big example that I always go, all right, would you take your little brother who's like, let's say 5 years old, never swam before. We're gonna plop him in front of Julio and I in the conference room here, and we're gonna teach him to swim.
We're showing the motions. We're gonna talk about it,
and then we're gonna certify him to be alone in a pool because he is certified, level 1 swimmer, right? Does that now make you comfortable than throwing them in the pool and walking away? No. And so that's my kind of joke about certificates and why hands-on experience is important. Is before I would trust leaving somebody in a pool, I would want to get them in there, see that they could do it. Right. And that's the importance of hands-on experience. That's, why we promote the incubator concept. And, what we're trying to do here is build a foundation for you guys so that when you arrive at the incubator, you have that foundation, you have the tools. It's like someone arriving to fix something in your house. They bring tool bags, right? Now I've got my tool bags. Now let me go play with the tools. Let me experiment. So now I know how to use these tools, and that's a hands-on experience. And I think that combination is really critical in being successful, really with most everything in life.